Welcome to our special here on the First TV, the mental health crisis. We have amazing guests today, so I'm just going to do a very quick introduction. One of my goals is to introduce the conservative movement, I've been trying this for a while now, is to move beyond just the mind. And I think guns and gun crime is a good example of this. Let's take there's like a gang murder somewhere, right? Progressives will blame the guns, right? And they blame the guns because progressives are at their heart materialists. So all that exists is what they can see and touch. Conservatives combated that and said, no, it's not the gun, it's the mind. People are mentally ill. And that's true in some cases, of course. And a lot of society, though, has gotten on this mental illness bandwagon, right? Like that explains all the problems in the world. And progressives have jumped on this bandwagon too when it suits them, because if you can blame mental illness, then it removes a lot of personal responsibility for bad behavior. Like, oh, it wasn't a decision, so they're mentally ill or something, right? Like someone could kill someone and they'll plead insanity, right? Or he's not mentally competent to stand trial. Like the guy who stabbed Zarutska in the neck in the Charlotte train. The last I heard, he's in a mental hospital getting assessed to see if he's competent enough to stand trial, right? How's his brain? Is his brain, he's got a bad brain. I guess he's innocent, right? That's how the left uses that. So the left has taken up this mantle of mental illness as well. What I would like to introduce, though, is a step further. And it's not that the mind should be the focus, but the soul should be the focus. The soul is what is most important. Blaise Pascal, one of the smartest men who ever lived in the world, in the 1600s, he said all of humanity's problems stem from man's inability to sit quietly in a room alone. That's a soul issue, not a mind issue. It was a couple years ago on this show when we talked to one of the world's foremost psychologists. And I asked him how the thing that we were talking about, how does this affect someone's soul? And he said, as psychologists, we don't acknowledge the soul. I thought that was such a funny answer because the word psychology means study of the soul. So that was a bit of an enlightening moment for me, that maybe there's a lot of people in this profession that are missing the mark. When people talk about a mental health crisis in America, I'd like to suggest that perhaps the deeper issue is a soul crisis in America. It's important to diagnose the problem accurately, because only then can you get the proper treatment. We've been told that all of our problems with anxiety, let's do anxiety, they're problems with the mind. And if it's a problem with the mind, then people look for mind solutions. And people seek mind medications. But maybe it's not the mind. Maybe there's something else deeper. And the Bible talks about anxiety. It says, don't be anxious. But do what? What are you supposed to do? If you're not anxious, what am I supposed to do? 1 Peter 5:6 says, do not be anxious about anything. But in everything, by prayer and supplication with thanksgiving, let your requests be known to God. And then what happens? The peace of God, which surpasses all understanding, will guard your hearts and your mind in Christ Jesus. The word heart here, as in guard your hearts and minds in Christ Jesus, the word heart in Greek is kardia. That's where we get cardiac. This is the center of your spiritual life. This is the seat of your soul. In Strong's Greek definition, it says the seat of all thoughts, passions, desires, appetites, affections, purposes, and endeavors. The soul can be affected and stirred in a bad way or a good, but it's the seat of your sensibilities and your emotions and desires and passions. This stuff's not in your mind. It's in your heart. But it's not in like the physical heart that beats. It's your soul. And I think it's obvious, how as a country we're missing the mark on things that are healthy for the soul. But it's time for us all to examine our own lives. Our passions, our desires, our appetites, the lives we're living. Are we off? Are we missing the mark? Are we doing things that are going to cause our soul to be not well? And when our soul's not well, when we can't sit in a room by ourselves alone for 5 minutes, 2 seconds even, when our soul's not well, then it moves into our brain. Then it causes mental problems. And then we blame that. Blame the mind. It's not. I'd like to argue that they're soul problems. We should get to the root of those. As Henry David Thoreau said, there's thousands hacking at the branches of evil to everyone who strikes the root. We need to be people who strike the root of problems. I'm doing a very short monologue here. I'm going to stop here because we have some great experts. But I really started to think about this when there was an article in the Telegraph from July of 2022, and the headline was "Depression is not caused by a chemical imbalance." And it was all these doctors and researchers who are like, oh yeah, we were way off on that. There's no such thing as a chemical imbalance, actually. And I'm pretty cynical about the pharmaceutical industry in a lot of ways. And it seems like we can add this one to the list. Let's take a break here. We'll talk to Joseph Witt-Doerring next. He's the CEO of the Taper Clinic. And he can give us all the background about what are SSRIs. And then we're going to talk to another expert a little deeper into what are mental conditions. What is bipolarism, for instance? Like, what is that? Right? There's some things with the brain, obviously. But again, I think most of these are soul issues. And at the end, we'll talk about how we can best focus on those. That's coming up right here on The First TV. Welcome back to our special here on The First TV, the mental health crisis. Very excited to talk to our next guest, Dr. Joseph Witt-Doerring. He is the CEO and medical director of Taper Clinic and host of the show Side Effects with Dr. Joseph. Dr. Joseph, how do you do, sir?
I'm doing well, Mike. Great to be here with you.
I'm grateful for your expertise. Let's start from, I think, the beginning. What are SSRIs and where they come from?
So SSRIs are selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, and these are a very popular class of antidepressants. And the way these drugs work is they bind receptors in the brain that increase the amount of serotonin to communicate with other neurons in there. And when they do this, they create a drug effect that is I think best understood as a numbing or a mood constricting type effect. And for many people, they will experience that as therapeutic. And for some people who are severely anxious or depressed, they will experience it as life-saving. And so that's what the drugs are and what they do.
What was it designed for and to do? What's the history of them?
So they actually have a really interesting history. It goes back to the 50s, and originally when patients had tuberculosis, they were experimenting by treating them with a drug called iproniazid, and they noticed that these tuberculosis patients who were really sick, all of a sudden they got up and they started to move around and they seemed more energized. And so the doctor said, well, maybe there's something about this drug that could be useful in patients who are having problems with depression. And so they learned about the drugs and what they did, and they found that they boosted chemicals like serotonin. And then they developed a whole line of drugs after that. And the most recent modern type of drugs that boost these chemicals are the SSRIs. And so that was Prozac in the 1980s that came onto the market and really revolutionized healthcare.
So I knew there was some backstory like that. That was bizarre or interesting, that like very different than maybe the original intent. So I'm glad you shared that story. That's interesting. How was it originally pitched to us when they first came around to like, oh, it's going to do X? What was the original marketing?
Yep. You know, Mike, I'm so happy you answered that, because this is asked that question, because this is one of the things that really bothers me about this narrative. And so you would think, like, way back in the day when they first discovered this drug, they would have thought, hey, you know, this drug is probably making these tuberculosis patients more energized, because maybe there's something like a drug effect to it, you know, kind of like an alcohol or a stimulant or something like that. That's how it's working. And that makes a lot of intuitive sense. But we actually got fed a different narrative. And the narrative was that they were fixing a chemical imbalance. And there's a lot of nuance in this that's really important. So, you know, I always like to think about a grandma saying, you know, don't sweep your problems under the rug. That's not a good strategy. But in many ways, using psychiatric medications is just that, because these drugs work through drug effects, you know, and they come with all of the issues like tolerance and the drugs wearing off over time and, you know, people not responding well to them. But they weren't sold in that way, which is how they work. They were sold as fixing an underlying chemical imbalance, much like a type 1 diabetic isn't producing enough insulin. you can give them insulin and you just revert them back into a normal state. Now, that's a much more compelling marketing message than, hey, we're taking drugs to essentially cover up symptoms of anxiety and depression, even though that's how they work and they may be effective in that way. And it's a more effective marketing message because it lets people know, hey, there's nothing wrong in your life. You guys don't need to fix anything. We're simply fixing a medical condition in your brain, and that's why you need to take this drug. And so that has been the message that's been pushed on the American public. And I believe it's actually led to a massive, it's essentially a lie. It's a lie telling people that they need these drugs, quote unquote, to get back to a normal state when they're actually just masking symptoms.
Was that an intentional, like how cynical are you about this? Was that an intentional lie and mischaracterization from the pharmaceutical companies? Or did they really think this was the case and now we learn different?
Yeah, like all things, it's a little bit gray here, but I mean, history now, to me, it shows that this was just an intentional marketing lie because, the whole idea of a chemical imbalance, Mike, is about there's some state of serotonin in the brain that's normal, and depressed people have some kind of abnormal state. And that's why it makes sense that you give these drugs, that they increase the amount of serotonin and you normalize them. And so I think we can give them a little bit of leeway back in the 50s when they were saying, oh, maybe this is, these drugs are working because they're normalizing the neurochemicals and any day now we're going to find it. But really by the 80s, we knew that there was no difference there. And the reason that we knew there was no kind of abnormal versus normal serotonin state was that we were looking at the cerebral spinal fluid. We were doing lumbar punctures where we would draw cerebral spinal fluid. This is the fluid that floats around the brain. And we were looking at the metabolites of serotonin. And we couldn't find any difference between depressed and non-depressed people. We would do autopsies when people would die and we knew they had depression, and we would look at the receptors in the brain of depressed and non-depressed people. And there was no difference there. And so by the 80s, we knew this chemical imbalance myth really wasn't true. But despite that, because it was such a compelling marketing message and, it was pushed out, I think it started as a compelling marketing message and then it turned into a lie, a kind of a white lie that doctors would say to make people more comfortable taking the drugs. They would say things like, well, if we make it a medical condition, it's going to be less stigmatizing. All of these men out there who feel like, they have anxiety and depression and they have a stiff upper lip and they feel like, oh, I don't want to go forward because it means I'm a failure if I go and ask for help with depression. We're going to give these guys an out. And so they kind of couched it in this like a compassionate white lie to make people more comfortable about taking drugs. But at the end of the day, it clearly serves a commercial message, and that's just one side because, there's also a very sinister side to it. The drugs don't work that way. They're masking symptoms, and there's actually there's other non-drug strategies that could actually get the people well without getting them hooked on pharmaceuticals.
Okay, I want to get to those, but what do you say to the people listening now, either they themselves or a family member, friend, who say, oh, it does work. I was this, I now take this, I'm better. What do you say to that?
Yeah. What I would say to them is that these drugs definitely do work. And so, but it really depends on what you mean when you say work. So I used to work at the FDA and I would do drug regulation over there in the Division of Psychiatry. When they say the drug works, it means the drugs reduce symptoms on a depression scale. And so, like alcohol or any other type of drug, there's a signature drug effect, and it's one of emotional constriction or blunting. And so if you are severely anxious and you take that medication, it's going to make you feel less anxious and you're going to feel like that's therapeutic or even life-saving. But what I want people to be aware of is the trajectory of this. So because these drugs lead to tolerance, what typically happens over time is that you get started on the medication, maybe at the lowest dose, and within 6 months, the drug effect is worn off. And then usually within like maybe 2 to 5 years, most people find themselves maxed out on the dose of the medication. And they say things like, I don't even know what the drug is doing anymore. or it's hardly effective. It's like 10% as effective. And that's because our bodies push back against the drug and they adapt to it because these drugs, they interfere with our physiology. And so what I used to see over time with these medications long term, and I'm talking like 10 years or so, is people just start to accumulate pharmaceuticals. They get maxed out on dose of one drug, then another one comes on, and then another one comes on. And the patients are getting sicker and sicker because not only do these drugs cause tolerance, many of them actually cause toxicity over time. And specifically with the SSRIs, this is how people feel long term. They start to have brain fog and they start to get really fatigued. Now, many doctors will say, hey, that's just your depression getting worse. You have treatment-resistant depression, and they want to give them more medications. But the reality is our brains are not designed to be in a drugged state for years and decades at a time. And so there's like this life cycle of being on these drugs where they work great at first, they wear off, and then unfortunately for many people, they actually make them worse. And so depending on when you talk to someone who's on these medications, you're going to get different stories. You get some people who are like, this is life-saving, this is great. And then on the other end, you get people who are like, I wish I never got on this. It's not working anymore and is actually hell to get off.
You brought up anxiety. Am I right in this assessment that if someone says I'm anxious and then they take this drug and then they're less anxious, that's great, but why were you anxious? Right? Like it never really solved the anxiety problem or what caused the anxiety, right? Is that what you mean by masking?
Exactly, yeah. Yeah, because the drug effect is essentially treating the symptoms. And I'm going to say this, treating them in an unsustainable way because our bodies, they want to adapt to these drug effects. When we alter our serotonin, it's not just this, this magic chemical kind of in our brain for our anxiety and our mood. I mean, serotonin controls like the way our heart beats, our gut system works, all of this kind of stuff. And so our body hates that. And it over time will just push against it and it will suppress it. And so then you're just on a drug and it doesn't really feel like it's doing anything. And, the reasons, Mike, for depression are so complicated. And I don't want this to come off in a way where I'm saying like, this is just feeling sad, suck it up and just carry on. I mean, we're talking about some of the most challenging issues that humans go through. I mean, like relationship problems. Imagine being in an abusive relationship and you have children. If you're anxious and depressed about that, there's nothing more challenging to get through. Imagine having a family that you have to care for, and you're stuck in a work environment that's toxic, and it's hard to get out of that and find new skills. Imagine if you're someone who's been through terrible traumas, and the way you've learned to cope with those things is through alcohol or maybe overeating, and you don't have time to move your bodies. These aren't easy issues. They're incredibly hard to fix, and I mean, they're just really challenging. And so, but that doesn't mean we should shy away from going at the heart of these really complicated, serious issues and kind of fixing them at the cause. Because ultimately, when you fix some of these issues at the root cause, people do get better, and they get better in a sustainable way.
That's right. You mentioned how for some people it's not as effective over time. I've also heard stories of people who stop taking them, or they try to wean themselves off and they do it too quickly and it goes horribly and everything goes awry and it's like a horrible experience, and then they got to get back on, but it takes like 6 weeks to ramp back up to the proper feelings of what they felt before. What is that? I mean, your clinic's called the taper clinic, so I assume you do some tapering of people, but what is the process of getting off of these if someone wants?
Yeah, great question. And you actually asked it with a lot of nuance. And I love that you have some background on this already. So coming off these medications can be really challenging for some people. Now, we were talking about tolerance before, and that is essentially the way the brain adapts to being on these drugs long term. And so if you're on this drug for, several years or a decade, you've essentially, you start to down-regulate serotonin receptors to essentially rebalance the brain. And if all of a sudden you stop these medications suddenly, it's like, all of those adaptive changes that took place to kind of rebalance the brain, to kind of push against the drug, if you just yank the drug out all of a sudden you throw the brain into a state of imbalance. It's as if you, I don't know, you went into a building and all of a sudden you pulled out a whole bunch of foundational beams all at once. If you do that suddenly, the building is going to collapse. And so the whole goal of tapering is actually to remove the drugs slowly. And so so the brain can readapt and it's not thrown into an electrical storm by just ripping the drug out.
Yes.
Now, the nuance that I want to talk about here is that there's a lot of differences in how people respond to coming off these medications. There are a large group of people who can stop these medications quickly, and by quickly I'll say within a couple of months, and they'll go into a bad withdrawal. They'll feel very dizzy or very anxious, but usually within a month or two after coming off the drug, they normalize. And that's one group, and I would say that they have very elastic brains. They can readapt to the drug being taken out. But there's actually a very large other group that has been completely ignored by the medical community who are having a lot of difficulties coming off these drugs. These are patients who are hanging out on online forums like Surviving Antidepressants, where there's hundreds of thousands of people there who are talking about the hell that they are going through coming off these meds. And for them, for reasons we don't understand, their brain is simply just not as elastic. And when they try and come off quickly, they have severe side effects. And some of them even can go through withdrawal for like 1 to 2 years. And this is why when, Bobby Kennedy, right when he was going through his confirmation, he was talking about SSRIs being harder to come off than heroin for some people. Now, he was hammered in the news for being, for exaggerating this, but this is absolutely the case. For some people, getting off these drugs is hell, and it can go on for a really long time. And really the only way to get off these medications, if you're one of these folks that's really sensitive to withdrawal, is to do one of these very slow tapers. And this is what we do at our clinic, where sometimes you're coming off over a year or two, just slowly reducing it down. So you just ease your brain off of it.
So is that the advice? It's just time? Like, is almost every brain able to come back as it was if you just give it enough time slowly? Will that work?
Yes. And so, I mean, the physiology of it, like just kind of coming off the drug, if you essentially just find the right pace over time, you can ease the brain off in a way that it can adapt to the absence of the drug. And then you won't go into severe withdrawal and have to kind of suffer from all of those problems. But that's also kind of different from like, can everyone come off these medications, which is a different question, because if you were on these medications because they were helping you cope with really terrible depression and anxiety, unless you've actually put in place new skills to deal with that depression and anxiety, if you get rid of the drug, the symptoms are still going to be there. And so it's really different to taper someone who, maybe they went through a rough divorce and they got put on a medication and they're remarried, life is going well. You can bring them off the medication, they don't have a lot of sort of ongoing issues. And that's going to be a much easier taper because they don't have problems in their life now. But if you have someone who's like chronically depressed, relationship problems, work problems, poor physical health, they're not moving their body, and maybe if they throw in an addiction on top of that, gosh, if you take the medication away, all of those things are still waiting for them.
Yeah, but the medication gets blamed and not all the other issues. This is a tough one in 2 minutes, but can you tell us about a potential connection between SSRIs and extreme violence? Like we see a lot of mass shooters and people are starting to ask questions now, geez, were they on SSRIs? What could that connection be?
Yeah, so SSRIs are well known to cause paradoxical side effects. And, and this is why they have boxed warnings saying that the drugs can make some kids suicidal. And when I say a paradoxical side effect, what I mean is an atypical response to the drug. And so the way I kind of make this more relatable is imagine that you had 10 people sitting around smoking cannabis, 9 people are giggling, having a good time, and 1 person becomes kind of paranoid. Now, the same thing that can happen with SSRIs. 9 out of 10 people can have that predictable sort of emotional constriction response, but you have 1 person who, for like genetic reasons that we don't understand, when you put them on the drug, all of a sudden they begin to develop a psychosis, impulsivity, and aggression. And so sometimes that paradoxical response will lead someone to become suicidal who's already depressed. And we've seen that time and time again. There's actually been billion-dollar lawsuits against the pharmaceutical industry, which have settled in the favor of the plaintiffs over these types of issues. So drug-induced suicidality is really well recognized. But it can also go in the opposite direction, where someone can become homicidal. And the media will essentially deny this. They'll say that anyone that brings this up is trying to essentially stigmatize the mentally ill. And really, at the end of the day, this is a gun issue. And if you bring up psychiatric medications, you're a conspiracy theorist. But to those people, what I would say to them is that there have been several lawsuits already that have dealt with this. I mean, we had Donald Shell, which is the Tobin case in Wyoming. This was a man who got on Paxil and had a previously documented bad reaction to Prozac that made him agitated. They put him on another drug just like Prozac called Paxil. And within a couple of days, he killed his wife, his daughter, and his granddaughter, and then shot himself. Now, this was a lawsuit against SmithKline Beecham, and the jury found them liable. And there was $1 million payout. And there have been several more court cases where, when impartial judges and juries have looked at the evidence, they've found that these drugs have contributed to violence. And now, I'm not trying to say that every single mass shooting that happens in the US is due to SSRIs. Clearly some people are just evil. Clearly there's some social contagion going on. But some of them, it is very likely that they were triggered by psychiatric medications. And we need to look at this. And this is why I'm so happy that Bobby Kennedy is taking this seriously and he's digging into this issue now.
That's great. Dr. Joseph Witt Doering. Dr. Joseph, thanks for all you do on this, your expertise here. Where should people go learn more and watch your show, Side Effects with Dr. Joseph?
Okay, so if you're interested in learning about the Taper Clinic, it's just thetaperclinic.com. And also our YouTube channel, which is Dr. Joseph, Josef, not PH. You can learn more about these issues. Mike, thank you so much. It was a pleasure to come on and speak with you today.
Yeah, we'll do it again. Thank you for getting the word out. Dr. Joseph right there. Wonderful. Coming up next, we'll go into a little more detail on the psychiatric issues like bipolar disorder. Like, what is that? What does the latest research say? Dr. Joseph, a couple times, for reasons we don't know. Man, we know so little about the brain, but we're learning a little more every day. We'll get the latest next right here on the First TV. Welcome back to our special, The Mental Health Crisis. I'm joined by Dr. William Walsh. He's the author of the new book, The Essence of Bipolar Disorder, based on progress in neuroscience and genetics. He's the president and chief scientist of the Walsh Research Institute. Dr. Walsh, how are you, sir?
Just fine. Really good.
What have you learned from your research of bipolar disorder? What is this, and how does it fit under this big umbrella of mental health that we hear about?
Well, bipolar disorder is one of the absolutely most insidious mental illnesses in the world. And roughly 9 million Americans are diagnosed with it. And it's been a great mystery for about a century, even though it's been clearly identified and known. There's been almost a complete failure to understand anything about it. And so myself, I've had a clinic that worked with more than 1,500 cases of bipolar. And if you talk to any psychiatrist or any researcher, it's been a great mystery. Nobody has known what the cause is, why people cycle between mania and depression, and why a person might be zooming along in life until they're about 20 years old, and then suddenly everything changes and they have this terrible disease. So out of frustration, about 10 years ago, I decided that I wanted to spend quite a bit of time looking at recent advances in neuroscience and in genetics to try to get some idea of what possibly this might actually be. Well, it's taken me quite a while, but I think I have managed to do an investigation and discovered what the cause is and why people cycle.
This is wonderful.
And
unfortunately, we have 8 minutes for you to do 10 years of research into 8 minutes here. But what do we need to know?
Well, basically, I think we understand now what it is for the first time. And we're a public charity, a not-for-profit public charity. We want to get the word out to clinicians, to doctors, and also to families that we have discovered something that can help some of them quite a bit right now, and it sort of points toward a way to actually prevent it and maybe eliminate it from society.
Go on. Say more. What do we do?
Yeah, and I presented this at the American Psychiatric Association, the Society for Neuroscience, a huge meeting of 28,000 people from all over the world. And I presented this both places, and it went over really well. But I didn't get the kind of excitement I thought people would have. And I think it had to be that both of these organizations have like 900 or 1,000 papers given at every meeting. And so you get lost in the bushes. So we decided to write a book and get it out there to everyone who needs to know this.
Okay, so what is it? What is bipolar disorder? How's it happen?
It's going well. The book was released last Tuesday, and there's about 500 books on bipolar, and we within a couple of days we were in the top 10 sales, and so it's off to a pretty good start.
It's great. How does bipolar disorder start in someone's brain?
It starts with a genetic predisposition. It's nobody's fault. It has nothing to do with their life experiences when they were young or how they were treated as children. It's something that's a genetic weakness in what's known as ion channels. These are ion channels that are there are 400 different types that are right in your brain neurons, right in the membrane of your neurons, and they orchestrate and enable neurotransmission. They enable the brain to work. And there's a weakness in this collaborating team of ion channels. And it's wonderful to know that because that leads to everything else. And most of the mysteries, I think, now have been solved.
And it's wonderful to know. How can we stop it or prevent it, make it less bad when someone has it?
Well, what we discovered was one major surprise was we not only discovered what was going wrong in the brain itself, but we discovered that it's something that's not enough to cause the disease when you're in adolescence or when they're younger. It has to do with accelerated DNA damage. It's sort of like rapid aging, and in this case, rapid deterioration of the regulation of your brain neurotransmitters. And we can fix that. That part we can fix. We can by using special antioxidant therapies, things to combat free radicals that are assaulting our DNA. So we actually the median age of onset is age 22 or age 25. So we've got 20 years, a window of time to take children and prevent this from ever happening for them.
Is it a medicine? Is it a treatment like with lasers? Is it food? How do we do this?
Well, environment would be good. You need and also nutrition would help, and counseling would help. However, the main thing is to prevent the assault on our DNA. And that we now can do without drugs, although there are probably some new drugs that would be aimed at this that could also greatly improve the treatment of bipolar people. Right now, things in the bipolar community are terrible. I mean, there's 70 million people who got this disease worldwide, and even with all the medications and all the studies and all the dedicated people trying to help them, near between a third and a half of them attempt suicide sometime during their life. It sort of shows how inadequate it's been. I mean, there's all these dedicated people trying to help them, but it's just been a mystery. And now it really helps, I believe. I think we've discovered what are these mysterious mechanisms are. We now can understand it, and it's hard to treat it's hard to fight an enemy if you don't know who or what it is.
Yes.
I think we've had.
Well, so we got 2 minutes left, but can you help me understand again, like how do you treat DNA? This is like a DNA thing. Like how do you treat that?
You can prevent it from getting worse. From the day we're born, our DNA is assaulted daily. And why do we age? Why do people get older? It's because of your DNA gradually deteriorating with time, with age. And we know now that it has to do with free radical assaults or oxidative assault on our DNA. And we in bipolar disorder, that's accelerated, and that's something we can fix. We can greatly ease that, and if we do this early enough, it would likely prevent it. But if somebody has this terrible disease, they need to get this fixed because bipolar tends to get worse year by year. If we get a 20-year-old or a 30-year-old and treat them, they do really often they do very well. But the same people, you see them when they're 40 or 50, it's dramatically worse. It's a terrible disorder.
Dr. Walsh, I'm grateful for your decade of working on this and getting some answers for people. Obviously, this could be a very bright light in a very dark place for them. The book is The Essence of Bipolar Disorder, based on the progress of neuroscience and genetics, by Dr. William Walsh. You can go buy it online and learn more at the Walsh Research Institute. Dr. Walsh, thank you for your time today, and again, these last 10 years. Coming up next, so I think it's a wonderful segment because none of this conversation today about the soul discounts anything that also occurs in the brain. That's its own thing. But I don't want to put everything in this brain category, right? Not everything is the brain. That may be the brain, but not everything's the brain. There's also the soul to take care of. We'll talk about that next right here on the First TV. Welcome back to our special, the mental health crisis. This is a really important last segment. If you have bipolar, anyone you know has bipolar, I would definitely go check out that book and learn more about it. It's encouraging that we are learning more about the brain. I was talking to a doctor friend of mine relatively recently, and I asked him, I said, how much do we know about the brain? And he's like, oh, like nothing, like 5%. We think we're so smart, so brilliant, that we got it all figured out. It's like, we don't know why this happens or what this is. We're just doing our best, and that's all we can do, right? My whole thesis of talking about this is not to discount things that are going on in the brain, problems, diseases, etc. And it's not to lump everything in one bucket. In fact, that's kind of my point, is to unlump things that are in one bucket. The mental health, right? Just mental health. And it's like, there's could be more going on too. And I'm also not saying that Christians, this is our Politics by Faith segment, I'm not saying that Christians shouldn't take SSRIs. There's certain circumstances, they're not certain, there are circumstances where medicines are a grace from God. My only suggestion is to consider that there are underlying issues that are causing anxiety or depression or many other things that are lumped together as just brain defects. Like bipolar disorder may be a brain defect that we got to fix. Depression and anxiety, it could just be like you have a life situation that's not good. We need to fix this. We need to resolve this. We want to get to the underlying causes of what's going on. Right? Maybe is there too much, like let's just take anxiety. Is there too much going on at home? Right? Is work, whatever? I mean, what's happening? What's your marriage? Like what are the issues here that are causing one to be anxious? We got to fix those. And I just popping a pill. Listen, again, emergency situations, here, there, whenever, we could talk about it, but as like a solution, forever, or like as a mask to cover up bad situations in life, that's not it. It's not it. I want to be cautious about medicines covering up realities of life, especially spiritual realities and bad decisions. A lot of anxiety and depression comes from unwise life decisions. We got to fix those. And Jesus calls for us to go to him. He calls for everyone who's weary and burdened. I want to focus on those words for a minute. Weary and burdened. Matthew 11:28 is where that is. Weary means people who are tired from labor, from constant physical or emotional exhaustion of life. Oh, I'm just weary. Strenuous efforts and hardship. To be burdened, right? So that's weary. To be burdened is to be loaded down by a heavy load. And the insinuation here is a heavy load of the past that's still constantly weighing you down. So I'm weary from the day to day of life, the emotional and physical exhaustion of the day, and then I'm burdened by things of the past that are pulling me. Maybe that's it. So it's like weary is pulling me, and the burden is pushing me down, and that's excruciating. So where do you go for rest? You go to Jesus. There are many people in the Bible who have been burdened, right, and weary. Elijah, even after his massive victories, he ran and he wanted to die. Job, of course. Hannah had the emotional pain of not being able to have a child. Joseph being betrayed multiple times. David, of course. Jeremiah was known as the weeping prophet, just burdened by the sins of his people and knowing what was coming. You're not alone. And I love all the scriptures about water restoring and water fulfilling. Psalm 23:2, one of the most famous, he makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside still waters. And what does that do? Well, he restores my soul. My soul. He leads me in paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Water, again, in Isaiah 35:6, when the Israelites, if they return to God, the waters break forth in the wilderness and streams in the desert. The burning sand shall become a pool, and the thirsty ground springs of water. This water, this rest, this restoring nature to it. Yes, there's a place for medicine, of course. But we need to do everything we can as well to make sure that we're individuals. Each one of us are never running dangerously dry. We need to do everything we can to make sure that our fuel source is in the living water that is Jesus. And if we do that, then we'll never be thirsty again. That's what he says. That's what he told the woman at the well. Whoever drinks of the water that I give him will never thirst again. We need to make sure that God is our fuel source. Ephesians 5:25 is the part that people read at weddings. It says, husbands, love your wives, just as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her to make her holy. And what else? Cleansing her by the washing with water through the word. So what is this water? I'm talking about this water imagery. What is it? It's God's word. Husbands are called to love their wives as Jesus loved the church. And we do that by cleansing her and ourselves by washing through God's word. We all need this cleaning. I heard one person a long time ago, they asked, why do I need to go to church every week? Well, it's the same reason you have to take a shower every day. God's truth purifies our souls. Jewish custom back in the day was a lot of hand washing, a lot of washing of things, right? We don't have to do that. We have to wash our hands for that sake. We have God's word to wash our souls. And I think we underestimate how much of a difference that, just God's word, can make to the health of your soul and therefore your mind and then your entire life. Too often we have broken lives and therefore we're messed up in our heads and we don't even talk about the soul. So people think like, oh, I'll just fix my head. We're like, you got this backwards. And then some people are like, well, let me just make some decisions in my life that are a little different. And you're like, okay. Or like they look for like life hacks, I guess is more what I'm trying to say. Look for the life hacks. You're like, that's not it. Start with the soul. Start with the soul. Nourish the soul. Connect the soul to God's word. That will improve your mind. It will clarify your mind. And then I would argue your life will improve as well, here and for all of eternity. Some things to consider. My podcast is Politics by Faith. We take the news of the day and run it through a biblical filter. If that sounds interesting and helpful to you and your soul, you can join us over there pretty much every day. Politics by Faith, wherever you listen to podcasts. Mike Slater, The First TV. Spread the word.